And ladies and gentlemen, the Philadelphia 76ers season is off to about as poor of a possible start as possible. I truly think that if you were to script a bad start to the season, you could not come up with something this bad. But nonetheless, here we are at 1-6 through the first 7 games of the season. We've had 2 NBA investigations, one Joel Embiid suspension, and some injuries to all three of the stars. So with all that being said, Jacob, how we doing, man?
I'm doing good. I don't know about the team. I'm doing good, but it's like anything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. It's probably the most nightmare start to a season that to the Sixers that I have ever covered.
Yeah.
I mean, the vibes are almost as bad as 2019, 2020 right now. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of directions that we can go with this. I guess we will start with the biggest thing that I would say is recent with the Sixers world, which is of course Tyrese Maxey suffering an injury there. So we did get the update that he's going to be reevaluated within a week, just shortly before hopping on here. Ultimately, they're saying around 2 weeks is mainly the timeline that I've seen. Feels a little bit optimistic for me, just based on the fact that when you think about Tyrese Maxey, this is a guy whose game is so predicated on change in direction, slowing down, change of pace, all these type of things. And hamstrings are the type of injury that absolutely linger if you're not careful. So I do think it's important they make sure that they give him some rest, but that still presents the Sixers with a difficult spot. So, Jacob, what's your outlook for both Tyrese and in the short term, how do the Sixers make up for his level of production?
As far as Tyrese, I mean, he takes amazing care of his body. He's still very young, so I'm not really like worried about him recovering. Like you said, it'll probably be more towards 2 weeks than one, but I'm not an optimist this season, and I don't think I have any reason to be so far. But
Yeah.
I think he'll be fine in the long run. It's not obviously it's not a James Harden situation. You remember his hamstring issues a few years ago, so it should be anything long term. And as for how the Sixers manage, they have the Lakers tomorrow. I assume Paul George plays, but this team you never know anymore. But obviously, I'm expecting a loss there because simply they just don't have enough firepower.
Right.
Sunday, you got the Hornets. Same thing. Probably should be a good game. I
Yeah.
mean,
Hornets sneaky playing well right now.
they are. They're a team that would smoke the Sixers in transition too, but that's a whole nother segment. But then, of course, Tuesday, you have Embiid's debut. So, I mean, in a realistic world, they go 0-3, but in an optimistic world, they go 1-2. So, the offense already has so many issues, and when you take out your most consistent player of the season, it's not going to go well. So I'm not expecting a fun team to watch these next 7, 8, 9 days.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you can see, already dropped you last in the Eastern Conference. Both the Sixers and Bucks up to 1-6 starts here, and that is really the concern for me. Is yes, of course, you want Maxey healthy, and that's such a key part of who this team is and who they're going to continue to be. But you can't just kind of let these losses continue to pile up. And to look a little deeper, that it has not been an overly promising result so far when looking at each of these games. We're one Maxey overtime strong performance away from being 0-7 right now, and that is not great. Now, I get Joel Embiid is a great equalizer who changes everything, but the reality is this is going to be an ongoing situation where it's not like Joel's going to return on Tuesday and then play every single game the rest of the year. In fact, like I think if we're looking at like he's already been out with the saying he's not going to play back to backs, he will return on the front end of a back to back with the Cavs being played the next day. So not a great spot there. When truly looking at this roster, some of it has been Caleb Martin not playing up to par. Some of it has been guys not getting the clear opportunity. Jared McCain being an obvious example that I think has been at the forefront for a lot of our minds. But I personally think Nick Nurse is probably the number one to kind of slice the blame for here, for how he's kind of portraying things. So to swing that question your way, Jacob, who would you assign the most amount of blame for this slow start to the season?
I would assign injuries first of all
Sure.
because obviously a lot of stuff is not in the roster, Nick Nurse or the front office's control. But with that being said, I even tweeted this out last night. Obviously, Joel Embiid's post play. That's a whole infrastructure of the offense. But at this point, you need to have a game plan, like
Yeah.
an alternative game plan to kind of get Paul George and Maxey going. And I'm gonna try to give Nick Nurse slack because it's only Paul George's second game back. But based off what we see against the Suns and the Clippers, the offense has just been disgraceful. I mean, it's just simply just a ball screen, isolation, no off-ball movement whatsoever. Like not even a down screen, like nothing. And you just can't win that way, even if you have Joel Embiid in the lineup. Obviously, the offense will look different there, but I just think more creativity is needed. And like I think in the first few episodes we pointed out that we were looking forward to see, Nick Nurse be more creative with the offense, all the weapons we have, and we just haven't seen that, Embiid or not.
Yeah, absolutely there. And it's particularly frustrating to me when you look around the rest of the NBA and you see some of the layers to these offense and the different just variations that they have from their base sets. And I don't know what the base set of the Sixers offense truly is. It's been a whole lot of Tyrese Maxey, go figure it out, is essentially what we're seeing at this point. And like even last night, like Paul George, I get to an extent, like that is why he's on this team, is to be a tough shot maker, a guy that can get to his spots and put up those looks. Yes, that's who Paul George is and why he's on this team, but make life a little easier on your new all-star that has just walked in the starting lineup. I haven't seen just about any of that, and I get like it's different skill sets from coaches. Like Doc Rivers, for all the criticism that I've had of him, probably the biggest attribute and what impressed me the most is his ability to raise the floor of a team. That you give him a bad basketball team or an inadequate talent compared to the opponent, he's going to figure out some things to give that team a fighting chance. I don't think that's a skill set of Nick Nurse. Now, I do think he's a better ceiling raising championship or ceiling raising coach as far as having a chance at a championship, taking you over that edge. But it's been really disappointing to me for him to seem like he does not have answers for this. And particularly when having this conversation, like they at least had to have an idea that this was the situation with Joel Embiid, even if it is not the concrete plan the way it is continually phrased to the media here. You had to have a clue that you may not have this guy on an every night basis. So there has to be a counter to that. And it does not look like that is the case. Is that what you're seeing too, Jacob?
Pretty much. I mean, obviously, I'm not an NBA coach. I don't know as much about the sport as they do, but like, how hard is it to get like Kelly an off-ball screen and let him like cut from the baseline? Or how hard is it to like, have Kyle Lowry bring the ball up and let Maxey fly off some staggered three screens for a quick three, or even give Paul George some off the ball or on the ball? Like, he's such a versatile threat, and I
Yeah.
just don't feel like they're being creative enough to maximize him or Maxey at this point.
Yeah, no, I totally agree there. And it has been nice to see Paul George stepping on the floor. And I do not have a Paul George graphic. Bad on my part there. But it has been nice to see him on the floor. Only 2 games, obviously 0-2 in these. For me, the most refreshing part of seeing it is the night and day. What stands out to me is his ability to drive and kick. That's something that has been far too scarce of a skill set on this Sixers team. There are some that I think he was a little too passive on that I would prefer him to be in attack mode and try and finish himself. But when comparing him to like a guy like Tobias Harris, like last year, that was never a part of the option, is that it was Tobias getting to his own shot and having that type of look. With Paul George, it does feel like it changes the offense. And he's not the best playmaker by any means. He's fairly sloppy in some of the regular passes, and I've seen that as a constant critique of him throughout his career. But it's still really good to just have that look of a real deal high level NBA player that can drive, attack, create for himself. It's been really nice to see in the offense. So through the first 2 games, what have been your biggest impressions, both positive and negative, of Paul George?
I think in a vacuum, the team just looks much more composed and cohesive with him on the floor. Even if he's not like, exploding as a scorer, thriving as a playmaker,
Hmm.
I just felt a real shift in confidence, especially in that Suns game. Did I just glitch out? But
You're good.
no, in the Suns game, okay, yeah, okay. But no, in that Suns game, I mean, you could really just tell the difference in confidence level. I think the offense was a lot more spread out, was a lot more confident, a lot less stagnant compared to those first 5, 6 games. As far as him scoring, I really like his shot diet the first few games. I thought he got to his spots, granted how, stagnant and motionless the offense has been. Playmaking, I think he definitely needs to be a little bit more work in progress. I mean, maybe it's for the injury. Maybe he's not being able to get to his spots as quickly and anticipating those reads. But I think, the way he's just kind of being a little too ambitious on those passes, like you said, leading to a lot of turnovers, especially in that first half against the Clippers last night. So I guess it's just about him shaking off the rust. And obviously, going forward when they finally do get healthy, he's not going to be put in that role of a playmaker, more like a secondary or third playmaker, because at this point, with how weird the offense has been, I feel like Joel Embiid is going to have to be the
Yeah.
lead playmaker almost. So yeah,
Yeah, no, I do think that's fair to assess there. And I don't think that's an ideal situation, but I still think it's possible you can overcome that and make that work. And it is tough to fully picture. And we're going to see until we see the 3 of them on the floor there. Now, there was a lot of buzz heading into the season, including from yourself and myself, about all these new look pieces, our excitement level for the guys like Andre Drummond, like Caleb Martin, Gershon Yabusele. So we'll start off positive here. Who has been the most positive surprise outside, like looking at the new look additions? Who's the guy that has impressed you the most through the early games?
I would definitely say Gershon, especially that game against Phoenix.
Yeah.
3-point shot's been a little inconsistent like throughout the first 7-ish games, but he really did turn it on. Like, showed a lot of potential as a pick and pop threat, which I think will be, greatly like beneficial, especially come the playoffs. We saw that him establish chemistry with Kyle Lowry in the pick and roll. We just see him do a lot of different things. Like he's very versatile defensively. He can kind of help. He can guard smaller centers. Um, Pretty solid passing skills, able to attack the basket, and I think that'll be someone that the Sixers will definitely need come the playoffs, especially when teams go a bit smaller and with how Andre Drummond and his lack of mobility kind of like the issue kind of flares up, especially in the postseason. So having someone like Gershon will be huge, and he showed flashes of what he's capable of. I think the jump shot is a little bit of a concern. It's a little bit of slow release. He's still probably getting used to the NBA game, being able to guard those quick guards and on mismatches has been the greatest thing, but I do have a lot of faith in him, and he's definitely been probably our most quality player off the bench so far.
Yeah, totally agree. That's where my brain went to as well. And you're right about it being a bit of a slow jumper, but I don't think that's the biggest deal for him. He's got a high release point with it that he does kind of the above the head kind of launching point there. And I also kind of like when you watch like his processing, like it'd be one of those like all of a sudden I'm open. All right, I'll shoot the three, and there's how it goes in. Like I kind of like that because there will be moments, and Phoenix was an example of it where the opposing defense decided we're going to live and die with whether that guy knocks down shots. And for Gershon, if you can shoot 5 of 11, as was the case that night, I'm absolutely okay with that. And I think what has impressed me the most about him is really his passing, and connective passing specifically has been something far above what I expected to. He had 6 assists in that Phoenix game. You see the European influence on his game as far as constantly keeping the ball moving. I think he's a guy that has a little bit of ability out of the short rolls that we saw in opportunities like PJ Tucker. We've seen Caleb Martin fill that role a little bit with this team, but he's just more polished as an overall basketball player than I honestly expected to be the case, that he isn't just this raw athlete who can go up and dunk, or, there is some finesse and fine skill to his game. So have been impressed with that. Now, projecting forward with Gershon, I do want to swing into the Andre Drummond conversation to an extent, because that is basically the conversation right now, is he is getting the opportunity as the backup center. Yabu himself has talked about when Joel Embiid comes back that he plans on playing a little bit more power forward, or expects that to be the case there. What do you think is the ideal role for him on this Sixers team? Is it at that big man spot where he can play some 5-out basketball, or is it as more of a true power forward?
I think it's probably a bit of both, depending on the matchup. I mean, ideally, I would like to see him more at the 4 position, especially with Embiid there. Like what I saw from Gershon and Phoenix, it almost made me want to start him
Yeah.
because you think about how much size the Sixers are lacking. You saw it in their first few games, whether it was against Toronto, Indiana, Milwaukee. So I think having a versatile guy like Gershon who can make the short roll passes, who can space the floor, who can kind of switch into various front court players, I think that'll be a big luxury to have. And I know we'll probably talk about him more, but Caleb Martin really hasn't been that great to start out the season. So yeah, I would like Gershon to play some 4, but obviously depending on the matchup, maybe some small ball 5 as well.
Yeah, totally. And we'll swing into the negative side of this conversation. So out of those same options, the new look guys, the new additions to this team, who has disappointed you the I guess who's been the biggest disappointment through the early handful of games? I've got 2 specific answers, so I'll let you take the floor first.
Damn, it's a battle right here. But I would probably say Andre Drummond. He got off to a strong start in the first few games, but I don't even know if it's a matchup issue at this point because we've seen so many different types of teams. Oddly enough, he's really lacking intensity off the glass. I know the stats obviously right there don't agree with me, but just off the eye test, he's getting beaten off a lot of box outs.
Yeah.
He's getting slaughtered in drop coverage.
Yep.
I'm sure everyone could see that. Like he's really been a defensive liability. His like lack of mobility is causing mismatches. He's getting forced to rotate, and that's causing even more offensive rebounds. So it's just been a struggle for him, especially defensively. So even if he does fill up the stat sheet with 10 points and 10 rebounds, he gave up 20 points on the other end.
Yeah. Yeah, no. You're absolutely spot on with all that there. And I'll do a nice little sandwich method here of 2 insults with a compliment in the middle here. So, first off, the rebounding, you have to be the best rebounder on the floor every time you're out there if you're Andre Drummond. You are the self-proclaimed best rebounder of all time. And yes, I get that you're averaging 10.6 per game, that it looks great, but you nailed it, Jacob, that there's ones that he's getting beat on, the energy level. And that Phoenix game where Gershon really stole the show was really like, it was incredibly evident to me that night. But that is completely unacceptable for Andre Drummond to not be the most dominant rebounder on the floor every time you're out there. That's your thing. That's your lane. You got to dominate it. Now, the compliment I will give to him, I will give him credit. His hands are far better than I remember to realize to be the case. Like on the perimeter, the steal against the Pacers in that win there, him coming up with those big steals down the stretch. I do think he's been very good about having active hands, getting involved in passing lanes, and making a little bit of impact that way. So that's been the area where he's probably exceeded my expectation the most. Now, back to the downside here. is I'm also really disappointed in there's really no stable offense that you can run with him. That I thought there would be kind of a baseline for him with some pick and roll opportunities where him as the roll man can just generate offense. And I know guys like Tyrese Maxey is not this elite playmaker. Kyle Lowry, even at this stage of his career, I don't think is quite there, at least where he once was or what we would hope for. But Drummond doesn't quite roll with that intensity to create for himself. He's pretty comfortable just basically like floating kind of near the basket where it doesn't do anybody really good. And I think that's where a large part of things have fallen apart in my eyes is like you don't have to have a pick and roll big. There's plenty of offenses that function without it. But when you just have a guy that is like, I guess having intensity, cutting to the basket, and trying to create some rim pressure there, it opens up a lot, and Drummond has done zero of that. So I think looking forward, I'm more open to playing Gershon Yabusele as the primary center in the absence of Joel Embiid. I don't think it's quite sustainable to have Drummond be like the long-term starting big. Obviously, Joel's coming back, and that changes things. But what's kind of your thoughts on all that?
I thought, especially against that Grizzlies game, because obviously, as you know, the Grizzlies are a really tough team in the paint on both ends of the ball.
Yeah.
I almost wanted to see them give a look to Ed Bona. Obviously, he's not
Yeah.
sustainable as a starting center in Embiid's absence, but just his length defensively and disruptiveness, especially against those pick and rolls, I thought he would give a lot more value than Drummond has. And as far as the pick and roll game, that's something I also don't think the Sixers have ran enough, whether that's like a player or personnel chemistry issue or if that's just Nick Nurse not emphasizing it enough. But even when they do, as you said, Drummond just has not been that explosive as a roll man. He's kind of, just kind of lackadaisical with the screen. I think we saw it a few times last night. I think Kelly and PG ran it with him a few times. Actually led to solid results, and there's just something they don't do enough. But even then, Andre Drummond, he has a really bad lack of touch of the rim, especially for his size.
Yeah.
So a lot of inefficient, and that's probably the reason why his rebounds are so inflated sometimes. But I just think it's just honestly a lack of intensity on both ends when you think about it. And as far as the team's option for a starting five, maybe, if you want to get a Santi Aldama, which I would
Love
be over the
Santi.
moon about,
Yeah.
you'd have a lot more options. But right now, I think, unfortunately, Drummond is probably the best option you have, especially against these bigger teams.
Yeah, yeah, they don't have much of a choice. You got to kind of ride with it, but I do hope that there are some better minutes ahead for Drummond. And obviously his role will be reduced quite a bit once Joel comes back, and I guess things start to settle in. I think we are seeing that maybe that sweet spot for Andre Drummond is maybe he's not this starting caliber center playing backup minutes. Maybe he's just a fine backup when he's playing backup minutes, which there's a role for every player. So maybe that all falls in when Joel's here. Now, to translate to the other guy that is the forefront of my mind, it is Caleb Martin here. And through the first 7 games of the season, he's averaging 10.7 points, 6.6 rebounds, 2.7 assists per game, shooting just 33.8% and 20% from beyond the three-point arc there. It's been tough watching Caleb, the shooting stroke specifically. Now, I have a hard time being completely critical of him because he's done a lot of good. That he is a guy that does a lot great defensively for this team, is making all the right cuts. He's active off ball. There's still areas where he's been far from like an absolute zero from this team, but the jump shot just has to be better from that. And to take it a step further, it does look like there's a bit of a hitch or a bit of a change in it. So, what are you seeing with the jump shot, Jacob? I saw you tweeting out about it last night and totally agree. So, take the floor.
Well, when I saw that, it gave me some post-traumatic stress after that whole Markel Fultz situation. But I don't know if it's an elbow injury or something. But like obviously, Caleb's shooting form, it's a little bit unorthodox, but it doesn't look like what we saw last night. There was something bothering him, and if not, then it's a clear mental lapse or something because that type of shooting form that won't lead to efficient threes at all. I think all like overall with Caleb, I think he's done great defensively. He's had a lot of tough assignments. He's guarding wings. He's guarding guards. Obviously, he tried to take the Kevin Durant assignment the other night, which was just height advantage. It was tough. He had to guard Harden yesterday. I think he's done okay there. Offensively is what does concern me. I think he's been better on the ball than he is off the ball, and that's not the greatest thing, especially for what his role will be once Embiid comes back and the team's fully healthy. I think as a ball handler, he's been okay. Like they've run a few pick and rolls. He has solid vision and transition, but like with Caleb, you want him to be more of an active cutter. You want him to be a better spot up shooter. And we've seen in this West Coast trip, he's missed so many easy looks that Maxey and Paul George has generated, and that's an issue. But obviously, we knew that coming in. We talked about like leading into the preseason how he's going to go through his highs and lows. So I think obviously, look, it's November 7th. It's a long season. We're only 7 games in, so he'll definitely have some highs and some more lows. But you just hope he doesn't, slump come April. I don't think I think like there will be so much open space between Maxey and Embiid and Paul George that it'll just be so much easier for him, whether that's as a cutter, whether that's shooting. Obviously, as we've seen with how stagnant the offense has been, Paul George has only appeared in the last 2 games. So overall, the season we had to see him with a lot more on-ball looks than I think anyone would have liked. Not to say he's been bad in those situations, but when Caleb Barton and Kelly Oubre Jr. are second and third leading ball handlers, it's no wonder I think we're bottom 25 in offensive rating right now. I mean, obviously it shows.
Yeah, absolutely there. And my apologies on the audio cutting out for the comments below. Should be back now, so let me get a heads up in the comment if that is the case. But I am seeing levels on my end. So as far
You're
as
good, you're good.
yeah, perfect. So with yeah, I guess with Caleb Martin, I'm gonna keep the jury out at this point. That I do think like when you look back at his career, that he is a bit streakier of a shooter. That there will be the highs and lows, and averages are always so funny that that's constantly what's talked about. Like James Harden is a guy that I always use an example of it. That when you see his averages at the end of the year, they look great, and there's no doubt about it. But he's a guy who you'll have those games that he scores 30 points and knocks down 7 of 11 3-pointers. And then he'll have that next game where he has 11 points and, shoots poorly from the floor. So while averages are what we always go off, not always the same story with every single player. So just keep that in mind when kind of looking versus, for example, Tobias Harris, who, you're getting a 50. If you need 20 points, Tobias Harris is going to get you 15. If you need 4 points, Tobias Harris is going to get you 15. Kind of the story there. So it does change a little bit. I do want to shed some light on Kelly Oubre Jr. here. I personally had my concerns braced, and to pull up exactly what we're seeing from Kelly this year, pull up his stats here. So 17 points per game, 4.1 rebounds, 1.1 assists, shooting 30% from three, which unfortunately a little bit lower than you expect, but not as much as probably should be the case there. 43% from the floor overall. I was very much braced for Kelly Oubre to be back to the bad version of Kelly Oubre this year after he got his money, had another year, a little bit more freedom and feeling more excitement in the offense. I haven't felt that way. That I thought Kelly's been exactly the same guy. I thought he's really been comfortable playing within his role and been pretty satisfied with the minutes that he's given us so far. So what have your thoughts on the Kelly Oubre experience been?
I love Kelly Oubre as a teammate, what he brings in the locker room, the vibes on the court, but he really is a frustrating player to me sometimes. But it is funny with the whole Kelly Oubre experience. When you're ready to like be frustrated, he'll come out, lock
Yeah.
up, I think Devin Booker, then he'll hit threes. So I think his role is just an energy guy. Obviously, he's not the most efficient shooter, takes a lot of boneheaded shots at times, but when he does, he's still always like providing energy and hustle on both ends of the ball. I'll kind of go back to that game against Phoenix. He did a great job against Devin Booker. So will give him credit for that, but he still has a tendency to be a black hole offensively. And with how much the Sixers have struggled on that end, they do not need another like shot chunking guy right now. They need more ball movement. They need more motion. Obviously, that's not Kelly's job, but still, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Like his shot diet has not been the greatest. It'll probably be better. I would love to see him go back to that cutting role next to Embiid when he gets back. We saw it early in the 23-24 season. He excelled at that, and I really hope he kind of gets back to that. Kind of has less on-ball reps, and depending who they get at the deadline, I would love to see Kelly go back to the bench. There, he'll be able to do all his stuff offensively, attack, be aggressive without really have to worry about anything else.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Kelly's never going to be a guy confused for a, floor general out there by any means. And there was even a play last night that was very funny to me where I forget if it was Yabusele or Drummond, but they kind of came up, set a screen, rolled to the basket, and were wide open. And Oubre made the pass, gave it to him, and led to a dunk. But it was such like one of those like hesitant, like I think this is what I'm supposed to do and throw it to him. But you know what? The job got done. So props to that. I just have a lot of sympathy and I guess like am willing to live with a lot if you just continue giving me the defensive efforts that Kelly gives me. And that's what's happening on a night-to-night basis, that his hands are everywhere. He competes hard. And there are those just couple stretches where I'm just like, yeah, I'm in on this dude. Like I'll ride with it. If you're going to give me that on the defensive end, I'll slide with a couple, 30% 3-point shooting on the season and all the other problems that do come up. I will say a little bit too much of like that fadeaway short jumper that he likes. I would much prefer, I think he's the best version of himself when he attacks the rim hard, trying to dunk everything, which in general he does quite a bit of, but he's gotten a little comfortable in just kind of like that jump stop and then fade away, like in that right outside the paint area. I don't love that shot, and he has had quite a few of them, so props to him, but just something for food for thought there. Now, to shift gears again, Let's talk some Jared McCain, man. I've been hyped about Jared McCain, been a fan of his, excited for what he can bring to this team. Has not seen the greatest opportunity yet. 6.7 points per game, 2 rebounds, 1.3 assists. Really has not played a ton. He did have a 19-point performance, which is one of the better performances of this entire rookie class. Although shout out Zachary Risache for looking like a number one pick last night. The best performance of any.
33 last night.
Yeah, it was terrific. So shout out to him. What have you seen from McCain so far? And how do you feel about, I guess, the level of opportunity that you've seen from him?
So first of all, McCain, he had a really solid week last night that I think kind of got unnoticed on a national level. I think the biggest thing that has like surprised me is his ability to drive the ball.
Yeah.
Obviously, that was a weak, not a weakness, but like kind of a emphasis on his draft profile, and he's done a great job of that. Whether that's off the pick and roll or just off of his own creation, he's been a really physical, like attacking the rim, which has been like excellent to see. As far as the 3-point shot, I mean, in this offense, he's gotten such terrible looks. I mean, most of it has just been like above the break threes because that's the only time he's really able to get those open looks because of the lack of motion, the lack of movement. So I'm actually really excited to see McCain next to Embiid because I think there he'll get a lot more efficient looks. His scoring will go up and he'll like naturally have a role without Maxey there. And it'll almost kind of be like the Nick Batum role because they almost have the similar type of thing, the no dip on the jumper, especially from the corner. So I think McCain can almost replenish that on Tuesday. I'm really actually excited to see what he does as the team looks for an answer without Tyrese Maxey. On the defensive end, though, that's kind of the iffy part. That's probably why he isn't getting such a consistent role, especially in a system like Nick Nurse's. He's been a little bit of a liability on there, but he has the motor. It's just about him, staying laterally, anticipating angles, and he'll learn that stuff as he, throughout his rookie year and the early years of his career.
Yeah, spot on. And defense has been the biggest issue. But for me personally, I need to see Jared McCain 20 minutes plus per game until Tyrese Maxey's back. That to me is the clear cut. At least this guy makes things happen on the floor. He's active. He moves around. He's one of the few guys who kind of has the complete package of dribble, pass, shoot, where he can do all three of those things on an every play basis. I've been really impressed with like the strength of him when attacking the basket. He's had some really difficult finishes already in the short term, so it's clear his size is not something that bothers him. I'm also like, you can see the confidence in that dude, man. Like he'll be yelling for the ball. He's ready to rip a three at the second it touches his hand. It's all things that I'm impressed with for a guy of his like age and in the position that he's in, because this is not the easiest spot to walk into as a rookie, where there are expectations for this team. This is a team that's underperforming, and all the other factors on the outside, the injuries, everything else that you want to throw in the mix here. So I really liked what I've seen from him. I've been high on McCain since they drafted him, and really going back to his season at Duke. I think they got to fully unleash him during this stretch without Maxey. I know there was talk about Kyle Lowry stepping into the starting lineup and Reggie Jackson being in the mix now, but I think it would be a mistake if those guys are clocking more minutes on the floor than McCain, at least during this Maxey stretch. You can sell me on the vision of Lowry being more important to the Sixers team when Tyrese is here, but in the short term, I think this is the time you see exactly what you have with Jared McCain. So, Jacob, to throw to you there, what is your personal opinion for what his level of level of opportunity should be, and what do you actually think Nick Nurse ends up doing?
I mean, I think this is the issue. I mean, it's surprising because I thought Nick Nurse would be more willing to take risks, be more willing to be creative, and he just hasn't throughout these games. His lack of, giving McCain constant minutes has kind of surprised me, especially, under the circumstances. I mean, you look across the league. I mean, even Doc Rivers is starting Andre Jackson Jr. tonight against the Jazz, and we all know Doc's reputation with trying to start young guys. So I think he'll just definitely need more of an opportunity, especially next to Embiid, kind of similar to how, I just said in my last point about how he'll generate those open looks that McCain just simply hasn't got this season. As far as the starting lineup, I definitely think, Nick Nurse is a Lowry guy.
Yeah,
Lowry's facilitating and shooting is going to be important. And I think Lowry's shooting is a whole entirely different subject. I think it's been
awesome.
pretty underrated this season.
Yeah,
But I think for McCain, he'll definitely need to have a consistent rotation spot, probably more so than Reggie Jackson Jr. I would be disappointed if he didn't get anything like less than 15 minutes. Like I think he needs at least 15 minutes a night. Obviously, you're going to want to see what Reggie Jackson has. I think Keith Pompey even said he's going to get a spot in the rotation. So I think it's just about managing that. But still, regardless if Reggie Jackson's on a heater or not, McCain needs consistent minutes throughout all 4 quarters.
yeah. So For Reggie Jackson specifically, we haven't seen a lot of him. I do think he looks a little bit cooked in my eyes, and I think if you take a scroll on the Nuggets side of Twitter from last year, that they would be more than itching to tell you that Reggie Jackson does not have it anymore. I didn't mind the addition of Reggie Jackson, and what I think is like interesting about this Sixers team is if you had taken Reggie and thrown him on several other versions of the Sixers team, we're so thankful to have him and that he is this like key bench piece here. That's kind of not how things have shaken out just due to the amount of guards that are on this roster and like where the needs are just slightly different. Do you think it was a mistake to give him that final roster spot? I know they technically have the 15th, or could it have been better served for like a Lonnie Walker or a player like that? So I guess at the time, did you feel that way? And now that we're kind of seeing how the whole roster's played out, do you think that roster spot could have been better used on another player?
I definitely think so. Even when the news broke, I just didn't get it because you already had Lowry for that backup point
Yeah,
guard spot. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it's okay depth for, situations where we're going to be without Tyrese Maxey for a week, but still, to be honest with you, I forget who was on the free agent board at the time of the signing, but I think it definitely could have been better used for like, yes, Alani Walker or just at least one more power forward, whether I think it was like Marcus Morris at the time, or
sure.
even I mentioned in the first episode, like have someone like JT Thor, just someone insanely athletic who can run the floor, which is something that we don't have a
Ty
lot in this bench
Jones.
besides Ricky. Yeah, Kai Jones. I mean, he was solid. He's been okay for the Clippers this
Yeah.
season. Exactly what they needed. Would be nice off the bench for the Sixers as well. And I just think when you look at it, like you could have just put that roster spot to better use. I didn't think a player of like Reggie Jackson's like mold was what the team needed. And obviously Nick Nurse agrees because he's barely played in the season.
Yeah, yeah. I think it has aged worse than I expected to be the case. And who knows? Maybe we get a Reggie Jackson heater in the short term without Maxey, and all of a sudden that looks like a worth it roster spot. So I'll keep my opinion out until that happens. Do see a couple of the comments chime in and appreciate each and every one of you guys getting involved in the conversation. Jacob, this question right here says, just tuned in from our guy Teacher Got Game. Did you admit that Nurse is Doc Rivers 2.0? So I hate those accusations that are flying more and more. Jacob, what's your immediate response?
No, they're two very different types of coaches. As you said in the beginning of the episode, Doc Rivers is a floor raising coach. He'll get you to the playoffs. But Nick Nurse, on the other hand, is a ceiling raising coach. I mean, obviously, it hasn't shown in his Sixers tenure, but with the Raptors, his creativity, his defensive schemes, they won Toronto playoff series, including the 2019 one against the Sixers. So I think at the playoffs, Nick Nurse is definitely more valuable. But obviously, Doc Rivers is a regular season coach. He tends to have more regular season success. So I do understand that, and obviously I saw Nick Nurse's strong suit, which is like the regular season isn't. But I think calling him Doc Rivers 2.0 is definitely extreme given the circumstances of this team. And when you consider that we even haven't even seen the big three yet, I don't think you can really make that assessment. Sure, the offense has been really stagnant, and I'm the first to critique that, but we haven't yet to see what this offense looks like when Joel Embiid is actually out there, the person the whole offense revolves around. So if you want to make that, claim maybe a season from now or after the playoffs, fine. But November 7th at 7:10 p.m. is not the time to do it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I've been very unimpressed so far this season, and as I mentioned, like he is the guy number one on my blame list for why it's been such a disaster. He's definitely been dealt a difficult hand, so I get that on his end as far as the injuries and all the other factors. I think he could have presented himself a lot better to the media for a lot of these interactions too, which I think just makes
Yeah,
it worse
proven
on
today.
everybody. But at the same time, I understand that Nick Nurse is not the guy pulling those strings or making those decisions, and I do think it would have been better if Daryl Morey himself or Joel Embiid himself had stepped up and faced the media a little bit earlier during that level of uncertainty. So I'm not ready to just kick Nick Nurse while he's down and say this was the wrong decision as head coach. There have been stretches where I've been very impressed with his decision making. I think it's just he's trying a bunch of stuff right now and not a lot of it is working, more so for the lack of talent than anything he's doing, but would still like to see some changes moving forward. And there is frustrating stuff like Yabusele and McCain, both after their best performance of the season, seeing a reduced role the following game, with McCain seeing 3 minutes, Yabusele just 10 last night. Like that rubs me the wrong way, and it is something that is Doc Rivers like. So I see the comparisons. They're closer than I expected to be the case. I thought it would be night and day different for sure. But I'm not ready to fully declare that yet. Now, we'll see how that ages moving forward. So you mentioned the Raptors comparison. I feel like that has been used a lot with Joel Embiid and with this team. I kind of like think a bit overused as far as where the similarities are. The reason that I say that is, for starters, Kawhi Leonard played 60 games that year, and I think That's pretty optimistic if we think Joel's reaching that at this point based on what we know. And the other part of it is Kawhi Leonard and Nick Nurse were like the two missing pieces on a Raptors team that had been competitive for several years at that point. That core with Kyle Lowry, with all the other pieces that were in place there, Norman Powell, like that was a team that was basically established that you were adding a little bit to. This is an entirely different Sixers team here. So it's not like there is more of a need to build continuity on this specific Sixers team than that Raptors team was the case. So when talking about these comparisons, like, do you think it gets overused, Jacob? And do you think the Sixers can still find a way to thread this needle and get enough time for this team to build enough continuity?
I think I tweeted this out earlier. I mean, the Raptors knew how to win without Kawhi
Yeah.
because, like you said, they've been together for so long, and they also had much better depth on both ends of the ball. You know, they had Kyle Lowry, they had Norman Powell, Fred VanVleet, sorry, emerging, Pascal Siakam emerging, Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol. That was a team that can compete with anybody on any given night. So I think the roster differences are like grave. I think if you put this 2024 Sixers team against the 19 Raptors probably gentlemen sweep them in terms of just like star power and depth top to bottom. I like even heading into the season, I was questioning this team's depth. Not to say that I was out on them, but there was a lot of question marks surrounding a lot of these players, and I think the only one in terms of the bench who has answered that call has been Yabusele. So with that, you're not going to be able to win games without your best player. I mean, they're just simply not built to win without Embiid for long stretches of time. And it just kind of goes back to if the team knew that Embiid was going to take this ultra conservative approach to load managing, then why didn't they do a better job of filling out the depth?
Yeah, it's a great question there. And to touch on that a little farther, what is your feeling for the Joel Embiid situation? So obviously he's currently having the suspension and serving his time there. The all expectation, all accounts for him to return Tuesday against the New York Knicks here. We have not seen him on the floor just this year. Been a lot of just weirdness about it, and we've talked about it a little bit. But what's your feel on the exact situation with Joel Embiid and your expectations from here?
I'm going to be honest, it might upset some people, but
Uh-oh.
I think Draymond Green said it best. You know, you're sitting out all these games to prioritize your health for the playoffs, but like at the same time, who says he knows how to win in the playoffs? Obviously, he was great against the Knicks last season, but that was only a 5 game sample size. Like, if you really want to go, make a deep run, you're going to see defenses like Boston, which he struggled against. You're going to see OKC defenses if you get to the finals, likely, or even Minnesota defense. Like, you're going to see all these elite defenses, and historically, Joel Embiid has not responded to them. Granted, he has taken a playmaking leap these past few years, and I do think any type of issues around the area would be resolved because I think he's a more smarter player in terms of a playmaker and scorer, knowing when to get into spots, responding to defenses. But at the same time, I mean, you're just kind of banking on this team magically clicking on the postseason. That's just not wise. When you consider Maxey being out for the next 2 weeks, Paul George is probably not going to play in every single back to back. Joel Embiid might not even crack 45 games. So if you don't have this chemistry, you're not going to go far, especially with managing yourself throughout the season. And who's to say Embiid's in the greatest shape come the postseason? I mean, it's just a very questionable strategy. Obviously, I get it, and I agree with it, but I feel like if he's been 100%, then it might be a little bit extreme. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a high risk strategy. I understand why they're doing it, and I do agree that it's like their best option here, but it's certainly not a surefire one. And with Joel specifically, this is the reality of what I think the situation is. There will not be a 100% version of Joel Embiid probably ever again. That I think these are degenerative knee issues that are only getting worse, and that there's almost like this pitch count for how much that he's got left in him. So with that being said, I get the concept of it doesn't make any sense when the priority is 7 months from now for when you need him at his best to really burn him out and force him out. Now, with all that being said, I still think the Sixers have handled this horribly, that I think a lot of this could have been cleared up, that my biggest issue with all of this is not the what, but the how, for how they've addressed things, the lack of clarity, allowing Nick Nurse to be snippy or not having a prepared statement that at least covers the questions adequately here. It's been frustrating me, all the details and the ins and outs of like how they've gone about it, but I still get it from the perspective. And I will say, I do think there is truth to Joel Embiid losing weight. I do think there is truth to him having this focus in himself and wanting to contend for a championship more than anything. I think this is a part of, in his eyes, sacrifice for the greater good, that he doesn't need to force himself out there for the regular season, compete for these awards. He's just got to make sure that he's right for the playoffs. And I also think there's some truth to like he just doesn't feel quite 100% right now. Like I don't think that realization in Joel's brain has quite turned, that it might not get to where you hope it would be, because that's a really hard thing to address as an athlete there. So I think it has looked like more smoke and mirrors than is actually the situation there. But I would say my issue is way more with how it's been handled than the actual decision making itself. What do you think about that, Jacob?
I kind of have like two thoughts for this. One, I feel like obviously, I'm not reporting anything, right? I think it's just pure speculation, but I feel like there's a lot more going on with that knee than they're letting on
Yeah.
because if it really was just knee soreness, why wasn't he playing by the third game? And if he really is healthy, then why would you try to risk having to carry this load? Think about it, right? If he was healthy, but like they're still trying to manage him, maybe he plays a few games right now. He's truly 100%. But this like extreme conservative approach is only handicapping them and forcing Embiid to get back to 100% as quickly as possible. Because you look right now, we're 1-6, we're 15th in the Eastern Conference. We're going to be without Maxey for maybe 5 games. You don't know if Paul George is like 100% yet. I mean, he's playing, but you don't know. Like he's still listed on the injury report.
Right.
So then you're putting Embiid in this position to be like, okay, get healthy. We're 1-6. We need to claw out of this. We need to, escape the plan. We need to do this. So it's almost kind of counterintuitive to what they were trying to do in the beginning. And the same thing is, if Embiid can't play back to backs against like teams like the Hornets and Pistons, then how is he going to be able to handle an insanely physical series against the Knicks and Celtics every other day in the playoffs? That's just kind of my train of thought.
Yeah, and I guess my take there is kind of like, I don't think it's about him handling it or him like being like, I don't think there's any difference for the opponent. I think it's purely like his knee, like how much it can take or how much he can handle there. And like, luckily there are no back to backs in the playoffs, so maybe you can hope for, you keep him on ice, you give him through all the training stuff as much as you can. Again, this is not an ideal situation whatsoever. In a perfect world, we're not even having these conversations for management that he can just play, but you got to live with it. And for all the trade Joel Embiid, move on to the next people, just to throw it out there, I'll just ask, have you enjoyed watching these first 7 games? And the other side of things is like, there's just no route to improving your odds in the short or long term. That yes, you can have the draft pick conversations, but that doesn't get you any closer in the short term. And like, we're far away from being capable of having the conversation. And I really think it's fair to assess that there might not ever be able to be a championship contender constructed purely around Tyrese Maxey. Now, maybe when he's 27, he can be that guy. He certainly is not right now, and we're seeing that from how this start to the season has gone. So you see what the version of Maxey and role players does go there. So looking ahead a little bit, doing a pull up their schedule. So you mentioned the Lakers, and then the Hornets Sunday, then it will be the Knicks Tuesday. So looking at those 3, you said 0-2. Actually, I want to take this one more direction with the Joel thing. The other part of it that I did want to acknowledge here is it puts a ton of pressure on Joel for those same reasons. It reminds me a little bit of like when looking at the Phillies, where they had the meltdown with Taijuan Walker being horrible and Colby Allard not really having a 5th starter. Like, while you can survive that puts so much pressure on the top guys with Aaron Nolan, with Zach Wheeler, that you can't afford to have a bad pitching day, because like basically the schedule's mapped out for you to get wins. I kind of feel like that's how the Sixers are trending towards the games that Joel plays, and that's pretty unreasonable expectation to have for any basketball player. So you kind of brushed on that point already, but is that more so what you're talking about as far as like they're gonna have to win every Embiid game?
Yeah, and kind of going back to my last point, it wasn't about the level of competition. Like I used like the Hornets and Wizards. It was just about the regular season and the playoffs being 2 very different entities.
Gotcha.
Obviously, there's no back-to-backs in the playoffs, but it's more just about the intensity, the physicality of of a potential Knicks or Celtics series. Will get banged around for 48 minutes constantly. And who's to say he'll be able to sustain that because he's only been playing 40 games, like hypothetically playing 40 games in the regular season. So that was kind of my point with that. So yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So we'll see how things shake out from here. Before we wrap up here, let's take a look at these next couple games. So we touched on them a little at the beginning, but it'll be against the Lakers tomorrow, then against the Hornets on Sunday, and the Knicks on Tuesday. I don't think they lose the Knicks game is my only takeaway in there. I think they probably lose both without Joel in these next 2. I would like to see them beat this Hornets team, but that's just a tall ask without Tyrese Maxey at this point too. I do think Joel is going to be enough to lift them to a win against that Knicks team, and while he has not had the sharpest starts out of the gates, he's still a guy that I think just his presence, just his impact on both sides of the floor changes everything. And the Knicks, by the way, have had their growing pains through their early couple games as well. So I'm going to lock in 1 and 2 that I think they lose the 2 games against the Lakers and the Hornets and win that Knicks game. What's your final prediction? Are you sticking with 0 and 3?
I'm gonna go 1 and 2. I've been keeping up with these teams that they're playing pretty closely, so I think they win against the Lakers tomorrow. Call me crazy, but
I
this
like it.
all depends on if Anthony Davis and Morey play. Because if they don't, I mean, if they do, then they're obviously gonna lose. But if they don't, and LeBron has to carry that load again, and with how awful the Lakers' depth has been and how much points they gave up in the paint, I think the Sixers have a real advantage there. They definitely could pull through and kind of get an upset win in LA. Granted, they've been there, they've had a few days to rest. So I think that could be possible. Obviously, again, depends on if AD plays. Against the Hornets, they're going to get run out of their own stadium. I mean, the Hornets play fast.
Yeah.
The Sixers have turned it over quite a bit. LaMelo and friends are going to convert that into so much easy transition buckets. Obviously, their front court's hurting as well, but still, I don't like that matchup, especially with a quick team like the Hornets. So that's going to be 1-1. And against the Knicks, I don't know. I mean, we know how Embiid struggles in his first few games of the season, kind of playing himself back into shape. So I feel like that Knicks defense is going to come out very aggressive onto him, and he might struggle a bit just because of the circumstances, and also that they're down Tyrese Maxey. And I feel like that might be, I mean, just for the Sixers' luck, that's going to be the game where the Knicks finally click. So I'm not feeling too optimistic about that game. So I'm going to say 1-2 if AD and Rui don't play tomorrow.
Okay, so we're both on the same page with the 1 and 2, and I will note if there's no Anthony Davis, I do think the Sixers got a pretty good chance. I think he probably plays tomorrow. I know he missed the previous game. It does seem like it's something they're going to manage a little bit more so than like a true injury type thing. So that definitely changes things from a pretty drastic standpoint. But would love to see them squeak out as many of these as possible. And I will just note I've gotten a couple of the chirps already for Mikal Bridges' shot looks back. I'll just say check the shooting splits exactly there because he's shooting 60% of the corners, but 15% above the
Yes,
break
dang.
on 3-pointers. So the 15% around the rest of the arc, not great just yet. So just everybody pump our brakes a little bit there. But Jacob, I appreciate you hopping on with me, man. I know you mentioned that
Of
you've been
course.
keeping up tabs with each of these teams. Is that all going down on all your social medias? And what else you got going on?
Especially my new account on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Jacob Moreno NBA. Kind of just, not film breakdowns, just quick overviews of each team, kind of keeping up the league, like power rankings of some sort, just stuff like that. Just some stuff I do in my spare time. It's just fun for me. So yeah, I mean, if you're looking for non-Sixers content covering all 29 of the teams, drop a follow.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're going to keep up doing this for the rest of the season for sure. So appreciate each and one of you guys hopping in, getting involved in the comments. As always, make sure you smash that subscribe button if you have not already, dropping a like on this video, and hopefully better days are ahead for the Sixers team. So for me and Jacob, signing off for the night. And as always, guys,